Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every human life where the inner noise becomes too loud to ignore, a moment when the stories we've been telling ourselves no longer soothe, but agitate. That moment is not the enemy. It is an invitation into truth. I invite you gently yet firmly to pause, not tomorrow, not later, now, feel the breath, notice the body, sense the aliveness that is always here, and ask, what am I avoiding? What truth have I buried beneath distraction, identity, or denial? There is a subtle yet deeply rooted pattern within the human psyche, the tendency to deceive oneself. It is rarely deliberate. It does not announce itself with great drama. In fact, it often wears the mask of reason, safety, or even positivity. And yet, this inner deception is one of the most significant sources of human suffering, the mind, so conditioned by time, identity, and formed, as not like uncertainty. It wants predictability, control, and above all, self-preservation. And so, rather than confront the rawness of what is, it constructs interpretations. These interpretations become stories, and the stories become our reality. But they are not reality, they are narratives shaped by fear, desire, and memory. For example, consider the thought, I am not ready yet. At first glance, it seems harmless, perhaps even responsible. But look closely. How often has that thought delayed action, stifled growth, or justified inertia? The idea that you are not ready may be a convenient shield against the vulnerability of change. It is easier to claim unreadiness than to face the unknown. And yet, in doing so, you may be lying to yourself. You may be avoiding the inner knowing that readiness is not a destination. It is a decision made in presence. Or take the thought, this is just who I am. It sounds like authenticity. But often it is a defense mechanism used to avoid the discomfort of evolution. When we say, I'm just not a confident person, or I'm always anxious, or I can't forgive, we are not speaking truth. We are reinforcing identity. Identity is constructed by thought, memory, and repetition. It is not who you are. It is who you believe yourself to be, and that belief becomes a prison when it is unquestioned. This is the brutal truth many avoid, self. Deception is comfortable. It creates a psychological safety net, a familiar cocoon in which the ego can hide. But comfort and peace are not the same. Comfort numbs. Peace awakens, and awakening begins with honesty. The lies we tell ourselves are not always obvious. They are not necessarily grand delusions. Often they are half-truths, quiet assumptions, or subtle justifications. They hurt me, so I can't move on. I need to suffer to grow. If I'm not in control, I'll lose everything. These thoughts are not factual. They are interpretations. And yet, when believed, they shape our entire experience of life. But something profound happens when you begin to see through the veil, when you realize that much of your suffering is not caused by life itself, but by the resistance to life, the stories you tell about it. You begin to wake up. You begin to realize that the pain you feel is not a punishment, it is a pointer. It is not asking you to escape. It is asking you to see. This seeing is not intellectual. It is not about acquiring more knowledge or mental insight. It is about presence. When you are fully present, even for a moment, the false begins to fall away. Why? Because lies cannot survive in presence. They require mental projection. Past and future. They require identification with form. But presence is formless. It is now. It is still. It simply is. In this stillness, you begin to notice the inner dialogue. You hear the excuses. You feel the tension. You witness the ego's need to be right, to defend, to be seen a certain way. And you start to see how much of your suffering is self-created. Not because you are flawed, but because you are unconscious of these patterns. It can be painful to admit that you have lied to yourself. It may bring up shame, regret, or sadness, but these emotions are not punishments. They are part of the purification process. When you are willing to feel them without judgment, they begin to dissolve. What remains is truth, and truth is not always comfortable, but it is always liberating. One of the most common ways people deceive themselves is through spiritual bypassing. using spiritual concepts to avoid emotional discomfort. For instance, telling yourself everything happens for a reason when you are in deep pain, not as a recognition of divine order, but as a way to avoid actually feeling that pain, or using the idea of positive thinking to suppress anger, sadness, or fear. These are not truths. They are strategies, and every strategy, no matter how sophisticated, is a movement away from what is. But what if you stopped? What if you stopped resisting your experience? What if you stopped pretending you are somewhere you are not, or someone you are not? What if, just for a moment, you allowed yourself to be exactly as you are, without the mask, without the defense, without the performance? You may find that beneath all the deception, all the inner chatter, all the mental stories, there is something utterly still, something unmoving, unchanging. It does not need to prove anything. It does not need to be liked or understood or successful. It simply is. That is your true self, not the false self constructed by thought, but the beingness that witnesses it all. The invitation, then, is not to judge yourself for your deceptions. It is to become aware of them, and in that awareness they lose their grip. You do not need to fight them, fix them, or figure them out. You only need to see them. When you see clearly, action arises naturally, not from the mind's compulsion, but from the intelligence of presence. To stop lying to yourself is to stop betraying the present moment. It is to return again and again to the now, not as a technique, but as a way of being. In this presence, everything false falls away. What remains is truth, and in truth there is peace, not because the world has changed, but because you are no longer resisting what is. This is the quiet revolution, not in thought, but in consciousness, not in doing, but in being, and it begins with one simple yet profound act, the willingness to be honest with yourself, utterly, ruthlessly, compassionately honest. To see the ways you have hidden, denied, or postponed the truth, and to choose presence instead. This is not a one-time event. It is a continuous unfolding, and every moment offers a new opportunity. The question is never, what should I do? The question is, what am I not seeing clearly right now? In that seeing, the doing will take care of itself. So begin now. Close the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be, between what is true and what is comfortable, between the noise of the mind and the stillness of being. In that space, you will find not just clarity, but freedom, not just relief, but peace, not just change, but transformation, and that, quietly and powerfully, is the end of suffering. Human beings are often caught in a web of mental activity, constant thought, relentless evaluation, the replaying of memories, the imagining of futures. This inner movement is so persistent, so habitual, that it becomes invisible. Like a fish unaware of water, we live immersed in mental narratives without realizing that we are doing so. We take our thoughts to be reality. We confuse the voice in the head with truth, but there is something deeper than thought, more stable than emotion, more trustworthy than belief. It is awareness. Awareness is not a function of the mind. It is not something you generate. It is what you already are. You do not become aware. You are aware. What changes is not the awareness itself, but the attention, where it rests, what it identifies with. Most of the time, attention is captured by the mind's content. It jumps from thought to thought, from judgment to opinion, from past to future, and in this constant movement, the stillness of awareness is overlooked. But in those rare moments, moments of deep presence, of inner silence, you may have noticed something, a quiet space behind the thoughts, a witnessing that is not involved, not reactive, not judging, just observing. That is awareness. It is not something you have. It is something you are. The awareness of the thought is not itself a thought. The awareness of pain is not in pain. The awareness of confusion is not confused. This may seem abstract at first, but it is deeply practical. Awareness is not a distant idea. It is the very ground of your experience. It is the place where transformation happens, because in awareness there is clarity, and in clarity there is truth. Truth is not a belief, an ideology, or a philosophy. Truth is what is before the mind interprets it. It is the present moment in its naked reality. But to perceive this truth directly, without distortion, requires a quiet mind. And a quiet mind is not something you force. It is something that arises naturally in the presence of awareness. Most people live in what could be called unconscious identification. They are identified with their thoughts, their roles, their emotions, their stories. They are not aware that they are thinking. They are completely in the thought. They are not aware that they are angry. They are possessed by anger. There is no space between the experience and the one who is experiencing it. Awareness creates that space. The moment you become aware that you are angry, the identification is already broken. There is now a distance, a gap. You are no longer lost in the emotion. You are observing it. This does not mean you suppress it or try to get rid of it. It simply means you are present with it without becoming it, and in that presence, something extraordinary happens. The emotion begins to shift. Not because you did anything to it, but because you brought the light of awareness to it, and light dissolves darkness. The same is true for thought. When you observe a thought without judgment, without resistance, and without automatically believing it, that thought loses its hold. For example, the thought "I'm not good enough" may have haunted you for years, but when you bring awareness to it, when you simply notice that this thought is arising, that it is just a mental event, not a truth, you create a crack in the illusion. And through that crack, light begins to enter. This is the beginning of freedom, not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the deeper freedom from compulsive identification, the freedom to see without distortion, to feel without resistance, to act without egoic interference. In the absence of awareness, the mind runs on autopilot. It recycles old patterns, relives past wounds, projects future fears. But when awareness is present, you begin to see those patterns. You begin to recognize that much of what you call you is just conditioning, learned responses, adopted beliefs, borrowed identities. And when you see it, really see it, it begins to fall away. This is not a process of becoming something new. It is a process of uncovering what is already here. Awareness does not add anything to you. It reveals what was always present beneath the noise. It brings you back to the simplicity of being. That simplicity is often feared by the ego, which thrives on complexity and conflict. The ego resists awareness because it cannot survive in it. The ego is made of thoughts, comparisons, and separation. Awareness dissolves these structures by refusing to participate in them. It sees them, but does not engage. It allows them, but does not believe. So how do you cultivate awareness? Not through striving, not through effort, but through presence, by noticing this moment as it is without needing it to be different. By bringing your attention out of the mind and into the body, into the breath, into the sounds around you, into the stillness between words. Each of these is a doorway. Each of these brings you closer to truth. You may ask, but what will I gain from this? That is the voice of the mind again. Awareness is not a tool for personal gain. It is not a strategy to improve the ego. It is the end of the ego. It is the recognition that you are not the thinker, not the doer, not the identity you have been defending. You are the awareness in which all these things appear and disappear. There is nothing mystical about this. It is deeply ordinary when you drink a cup of tea and you are fully present, feeling the warmth, tasting the flavor, hearing the sound of the cup on the table. You are in awareness. When you listen to another person without preparing your reply, without judging or fixing, just listening, you are in awareness. When you notice a thought arise and fall away like a cloud in the sky, you are in awareness. In this awareness, life becomes vivid, not because it has changed, but because you are finally seeing it. The colors are brighter, the sounds are richer, the moments are deeper. Why? Because you are no longer distracted by mental noise. You are no longer divided within yourself. You are here, and here is where truth lies, not in the mind's conclusions, but in the felt reality of now. When you are aware, you see that everything you need is already present. That peace is not something to achieve. It is the natural state beneath the clutter. That joy is not something to pursue. It arises spontaneously when resistance ends. This is the power of awareness. It does not give you a better version of yourself. It shows you that you are not who you thought you were, and in that revelation, everything false falls away. So the invitation is simple: be still, be present, be aware, not as a goal, not as a practice, but as a return. A return to yourself, not the self of identity, but the self of presence, the self that does not need to be fixed, improved, or completed, the self that is whole here and now. In that space, the truth is not hidden. It is obvious, it is silent, it is alive, and you are that. To live without self-honesty is to live in fragmentation. It is to be divided against oneself, to walk through life wearing a mask, not only for others, but for your own inner audience. And in that division, there is tension. In that denial of what is true, there is suffering. Yet most people live this way not out of malice, but out of habit, out of fear. We fear what we might find if we look too closely. We fear the collapse of the persona we've carefully constructed, and so we tell ourselves stories, not because they are true, but because they are familiar. But there comes a moment in each life, a quiet, pivotal moment, when the cost of self-deception becomes too great. When the inner dissonance becomes louder than the outer performance, when the mind's stories, no matter how well rehearsed, can no longer soothe the ache of the soul. In that moment, a choice arises: continue the performance or stop and look inward. To look truly and fearlessly is the beginning of self-honesty, and with that, the beginning of liberation. What does it mean to be honest with oneself? It is not about confessing sins or listing flaws. It is deeper than that. It is the willingness to see things as they are, within you. It is the courage to sit in presence with your thoughts, your emotions, your motivations, without the need to justify, explain, or defend. Self-honesty is not about harshness. It is not another layer of judgment. It is about clarity, about removing the filters that distort perception. Most of us are not honest about our fears. We pretend we are not afraid, or we cloak fear in other words: I'm just being realistic. I'm not interested in that. It's not the right time. But beneath these rationalizations, fear often lives. Fear of failure, rejection, vulnerability, the unknown. Honesty begins when you are willing to say, yes, I am afraid. I don't know what will happen, but I will not run from it anymore. Similarly, we are often not honest about our pain. We downplay it. We distract ourselves. We compare it to others. I shouldn't feel this way. Other people have it worse. But pain, when ignored, does not disappear. It lodges itself deeper in the body, in the heart. It influences our behavior, our relationships, our thoughts. To be honest is to feel it, to allow it space, not to wallow, but to witness. In that witnessing, healing begins. There is also dishonesty in our ambitions. How often do we pursue things not because they are aligned with our deepest truth, but because they are expected, because they are admired, because they reinforce the image we wish to project? Many chase success not because they truly desire it, but because they fear insignificance. Many stay in roles, relationships, or identities long after their inner voice has whispered, "This is not for you anymore." But they stay because the alternative, the unknown, is frightening. Liberation begins the moment you stop pretending. The moment you no longer need to appear a certain way, even to yourself. The moment you allow the truth of your experience to surface, not as a problem to fix, but as something to acknowledge. Self-honesty is not the end point, it is the doorway. It is not the solution, it is the opening through which truth can flow, and in truth there is freedom, not because you gain control, but because you release resistance. We often misunderstand the concept of freedom. We think it means the ability to do whatever we want, but true freedom is not circumstantial, it is internal. It is the absence of inner conflict. It is the state in which there is no longer anything to hide, suppress, or deny. Imagine walking through life without needing to uphold an image, without fearing your own thoughts or emotions, without being at war with any part of yourself. That is liberation, and that begins with honesty. But to be honest with yourself, you must become quiet, you must become still. The voice of truth is not loud, it does not shout over the noise of the world or the ego, it speaks softly in the spaces between thoughts. It is a knowing, a recognition. Sometimes it comes as a discomfort that won't go away. Other times it arises as a deep clarity, a simple, unmistakable yes or no in the body. You do not need to go looking for this voice. You only need to stop ignoring it. There is great humility in self-honesty, because it asks you to let go of being right, to let go of being admired, to let go of the comforting illusions that have shaped your identity. You may realize that some of what you believed was never yours to begin with, that some of your desires were borrowed, that some of your wounds are still open. This is not a tragedy, it is an unveiling. You are not becoming less, you are becoming real. Honesty with oneself also means acknowledging your inner light, your strength, your capacity for love, for forgiveness, for presence. Sometimes people are afraid of this part even more than their shadows. They downplay their gifts, hide their brilliance, or shrink from their calling. They pretend not to know what they know, or not to feel what they feel. But the soul cannot be fooled, it knows, and it waits patiently for your alignment. To be honest is to stop negotiating with your intuition, to stop waiting for permission, to stop trying to fit into molds that no longer hold you. It does not mean you must make sudden, dramatic changes. It means that you no longer lie to yourself about what is real, that you allow the truth to guide you, even if it asks you to be still for a while, even if it leads you into uncertainty. This path is not always easy. It may require the crumbling of old identities. It may ask you to release attachments. It may bring temporary discomfort, but what you gain is immeasurable. You gain peace, the kind that does not depend on circumstances. You gain integrity, the alignment between your inner world and outer expression. You gain presence, the ability to meet each moment without resistance. Honesty with oneself does not mean perfection. It does not mean that you will never fall into old patterns or fears. It means that when you do, you see it, you acknowledge it, and you return. Again and again, you return to truth. There is no shame in forgetting, only in refusing to remember. And so the invitation is this, to sit quietly with yourself, not to think, but to listen. To place your attention not on the external world, but on the internal landscape. What is true right now, what is being felt but not spoken, what is being avoided, denied, or pushed aside. You do not need to fix anything. You only need to see it. Truth does the work when you stop running from it. This is the beginning of liberation, not in the future, but now, in this breath, in this willingness to be with what is, in this moment of radical honesty. And from that place, life becomes simpler, not easier always, but more real, more alive, and in that aliveness, you are no longer a seeker of freedom, you are freedom itself. There is a moment in each life when the veil begins to lift. Not all at once, not dramatically perhaps, but gently, almost imperceptibly. It begins with a quiet discomfort, a sense that something isn't quite right. Maybe it's the way you're living, the roles you're playing, the dreams you're chasing. You don't yet know what is false, but you begin to suspect that something is. This is the moment the illusion begins to crack, and in that crack, transformation finds its entry point. The illusion, you see, is not something outside of you. It is not the world or the people in it. The illusion is internal. It is the story you've been telling yourself about who you are, what life is, and what is required of you to be enough. It is the set of beliefs, identities, and assumptions you inherited, adopted, or constructed in order to feel safe, and for a time it served a purpose. It helped you make sense of things. It gave structure to the unknown. But at some point, what once helped you begins to imprison you. The most persistent illusion is the self-image, the idea that you are your name, your profession, your achievements, your trauma, your body, your past. These are aspects of your human experience, but they are not the essence of who you are. They are temporary, they change, they pass. The real you, the one who observes, who witnesses, who is not come and go. It remains. To believe you are only the surface of yourself is to live in illusion. And while this illusion can be maintained for a while through distraction, ambition, or approval seeking, it comes at a cost. The cost is your presence, the cost is your peace, and eventually the cracks in the illusion grow wider because truth, by its very nature, wants to be seen. Transformation cannot occur while you are still invested in maintaining a false identity. You may try to change habits, upgrade your thinking, or pursue spiritual practices, but if the foundation of those efforts is still rooted in illusion, they will ultimately collapse. Real transformation does not add something to you. It removes what is not real. It subtracts what is false. It reveals what was always there. This process often feels like loss. You lose certainty. You lose familiarity. You lose the comfort of your old explanations. But in truth, what is lost was never truly you. It was only the idea of you, the version of yourself created in response to fear, pain, or societal conditioning. When that false self begins to fall away, what remains is not emptiness, but space. And in that space, something new can emerge. Not a better version of the ego, but the presence of your authentic being. The ego resists this process. It equates survival with control. It fears surrender. It believes that if it is not in charge, something terrible will happen. But this fear is unfounded. Surrender is not weakness. It is the strength to stop clinging to what no longer serves you. It is the willingness to face the truth, even if that truth disrupts your comfortable narrative. And it is precisely there, and the disruption, that real transformation begins. Letting go of illusion requires awareness. You must become aware of the masks you wear, the roles you perform, the beliefs you protect. And awareness does not judge, it sees. It does not analyze, it illuminates. When you see clearly that something is false, you do not need to fight it. It simply falls away like mist in the morning sun. Truth does not struggle with illusion. It reveals it. And in that revealing, illusion dissolves. One of the most persistent illusions is the belief that happiness lies somewhere outside of you, some future event, some external condition, some other person. This belief keeps you in constant pursuit, always chasing, never arriving. But the pursuit is endless because what you are chasing does not exist in the form you believe it does. Joy, peace, freedom, these are not destinations. They are states of being that arise when the noise of the ego subsides, and so, transformation is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before you forgot. It is about returning, not to the past, but to the presence that is always now. The journey is inward, not forward. You do not need to add more knowledge, more strategies, or more possessions. You need only to become still enough to see what has always been true. The question then becomes, what are you still holding onto that is not real? What stories do you tell to maintain a sense of control? What patterns do you repeat to avoid feeling discomfort? What beliefs have you inherited that no longer resonate with your deepest knowing? These are not questions to answer with the mind, but to sit with in silence. The answers will arise, not as thoughts, but as inner clarity. This clarity is not dramatic. It does not demand attention. It simply is, and when you align with it, a quiet transformation begins. You become less reactive. You no longer need to be right. You stop defending illusions. You begin to respond to life rather than resist it. You become spacious, present, aware. This transformation is not a destination. It is a continual unfolding. There is no final version of you to reach, no permanent identity to stabilize. What transforms is not who you are, but how you relate to who you think you are. The self that suffers is the imagined self. When that image dissolves, so does the suffering. This is why many people experience a deep sense of peace in moments of loss. When something they clung to is taken away, status, relationship, security, they are momentarily freed from the illusion. And in that space, they touch something real. It is not the loss that transforms them, but the removal of the illusion that they needed what was lost to be whole. In that absence, presence emerges. You do not need to wait for crisis to begin this process. You can choose to examine what is real now, to question what you've accepted without awareness, to become still enough to listen, not to the noise of thought, but to the quiet voice of being. That voice does not speak in urgency. It speaks in stillness, and it will always point you back to what is true. The truth is not something to believe in. It is something to become, not through effort, but through surrender, not through achievement, but through release. Real transformation cannot be forced. It unfolds naturally when the conditions of illusion are no longer present. Just as a flower blooms when the light and warmth are right, so too does your being emerge when truth is allowed in. This process is not something you control. It is something you cooperate with. Your role is to be willing, to observe, to let go. Transformation is not dramatic. It is often subtle, quiet, unnoticed by others. But inwardly, it is everything. You no longer live as a character in a story. You live as the awareness in which the story unfolds, and in that awareness, life becomes simple, not always easy, but profoundly simple. You do what needs to be done, but without drama. You face what arises, but without resistance. You no longer need to pretend, to perform, to protect a fragile self-image. You are here, fully, and that is enough. So let the illusions fall, let the false identities crumble, let the stories dissolve. What remains is not a void. It is the space of your true self, and in that space, real transformation begins, not as an act of becoming, but as a return to being. You do not need to chase it. You only need to stop running from what is real. In the end, transformation is not something you do. It is what happens when you stop clinging to who you are not. And so, as we bring this exploration to a close, let us return to what is simple, what is immediate. Not another idea, not another concept, but a direct experience of presence. We began with the uncomfortable truth that many avoid, the inner falsehoods, the narratives we tell ourselves to feel safe, the resistance to what simply is. But what we have also uncovered is that within this very truth lies a gateway, a doorway to peace, to clarity, and to a life unburdened by pretense. To stop lying to yourself is not an act of self-condemnation. It is an act of profound compassion, because to see clearly, even when it's difficult, is to finally become aligned with life. It is to meet yourself not as you wish to be seen, but as you truly are, and to discover in that seeing that you are enough. When you become honest, the layers of illusion begin to fall. The masks, the defenses, the self-images carefully constructed, they lose their power over you, and in their absence, something extraordinary emerges: stillness. Awareness, presence, you begin to live not through the lens of fear, but through the clarity of truth. This is the path of transformation, not through addition, but through subtraction, not by striving to become someone, but by letting go of what you are not. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to figure everything out. You only need to be willing to see, to feel, and to be. What you are looking for has never been outside of you. So allow the illusions to end. Allow the truth to rise, not tomorrow, not someday, but now. In this breath, in this still moment, because the brutal truth you're avoiding is also the truth that will set you free. Thank you.